Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe, and today we have a special guest. I'm very excited. We have with us Tony Loyd, who is a podcaster. Last month, I had the opportunity to be on his show. I like to tell him that turnabout is fair play, and today Tony has agreed to be on our show. Tony, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Devin. I'm glad to be here. I'm like you, I'm certainly not used to being on this end of the interview.
There's a lot more pressure on that side, isn't there?
There is.
This is the easy job. Well, Tony, thank you very much for joining us. You told me in advance that really one of the formative experiences of your life was when you were 15. You had a near drowning experience. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's It really was a turning point in my life, Devin. And what happened was I was a young man. I was sort of socially awkward, like a lot of young men are. And I was 15 years old. My family had moved from Arkansas to Illinois. And so a lot of social isolation. I really didn't have a lot of friends. And one day I was standing at the edge of a newly formed man-made lake called Lake Williamsville. It's in Williamsville, Illinois. And a young man about my age asked me, "Hey, do you want to race across the lake?" And I looked across the lake. I could see it looked like it was doable. And so I said, "Sure, let's do it." And so we jumped into the water and we started swimming across. And he was a very smooth, strong swimmer. And I was just a self-taught swimmer, and I'm flailing about, and I'm mostly using my arms, not my legs. I wasn't a great swimmer. And about halfway across the lake, a thought occurred to me, which is, I don't think I'm going to make it. I just don't think I'm going to reach that other shore. And that's kind of a bad time to have that thought. So I looked a little bit to my right, and I could see that there was what appeared to be some rocks. And so I thought, well, I'll swim over there. So instead of headed towards the shore, I turned 90 degrees and started swimming sideways across the lake towards what I thought was rocks. And when I reached them, what I found them to be was they were waterlogged logs that were vertical in the water, and just the tips of them were sticking out of the top of the water. And so I reached out and put my hand on the first one, and it just sank down under my hand. And I tried a few things, and then I thought, well, maybe if I got one under my feet, it would support me and I could rest for a second. So I got myself vertical in the water then, and then I was really in trouble. And there was nothing there to support me. I was in about 15 feet of water, and I started struggling and splashing. And this other young man, he swam over to me, and he was near me. Now, he knew if he got too close to me, I was going to reach out and grab him, and we were both going to go down. So he kept some distance, but he was shouting instructions to me. So I'm slapping the water, and the water, it's all loud, and the water's splashing up in my face, and I can taste the water, and he's yelling at me, and it's just a cacophony of noise and smells and tastes and all that. And all of a sudden, it was completely quiet. And something got my attention. And what got my attention was a cool feeling on the back of my head. And I opened my eyes, and I realized that I was lying on the bottom of the lake. And it was really dark. There was one particular direction where the water was less dark than the other. It was a little lighter, and I reasoned in my feeble mind that was running out of oxygen that was up. And so I managed to get my foot against something solid on the bottom and push off. And when I broke the surface, I rolled over on my back, and I started gasping for breath. And I was making this really loud rasping noise, sort of I was breathing so hard. And by being on my back for a while, I managed to get a little bit of rest. And then this friend of mine, Tom, he swam near me while I very slowly made my way over to the shore. And when I reached the other shore, and I was okay, and of course, I'm shaking, and everyone's really afraid. Some friends of mine had gathered on the shore there, or some acquaintances. I didn't have that many friends, and as I sat there, a couple of thoughts occurred to me, and one of them is, this life is so incredibly brief. And the second thought is, nothing I have worried about up until this moment really matters. And so I should use this one short, amazing life and go make an impact. And that thought stayed with me for a lot of years, but that's really where it all began. It was right there as a 15-year-old sitting on the edge of that shore. When I went into the water, I was afraid. I was socially isolated. I had really bad acne. I was socially awkward. All those things were worries to me. And when I came out of that water, it was like something had shifted in my brain. And that's really been sort of a theme in my life, in the back of my mind all these years, is use this one short, amazing life and go make an impact.
Wow. What an amazing story. I mean, to think about such a genuinely close brush with death. And then also, it's remarkable to me that you had the judgment, the maturity at 15 to draw from that some significance and not just blow it off as teenagers are wont to do. That's really an amazing story. And I appreciate you taking the time to share such a personal experience with us.
Yeah.
Now, you told me that you didn't go to college straight out of school. At least you didn't finish straight out of high school.
Right.
You ended up driving a truck. Tell us a little bit about your early career.
Sure. Well, when I mentioned that I'm from Arkansas, and so as people from Arkansas are wont to do, I married at a very young age. We had children fairly early, and I was going to school part-time, and I was driving a truck. Later on, I was a janitor, but eventually I took some technical training. And through that technical training and through some mentoring and some other programs, I was able to get into some very technical work. I have, over the years, I've done things from, you mentioned that I drove a truck and that I was a janitor and that all these things. But through this technical training program, and then through a mentoring and a junior apprentice sort of program, I was able to get eventually into a program called health physics. And health physics is the measurement of radiation and contamination and setting of environmental protection measures. And that might sound like something you need a PhD to do, but keep in mind that this was not too long after 3 Mile Island had its problems. And so the industry was really desperate for new trainees to come in and to learn this skill. And so, Devin, this really brings me to another theme that has run throughout my career, which is the way I got into the training program and the way that I got into the mentoring program and the junior apprenticeship program was that people liked me for whatever reason. They were kind to me and they recommended me. And because of that, it overcame so much of a lack of education or a formal education, a master's degree or anything. I had some college, but not enough. And then I had this technical training. It allowed me to be open and to learn and to find new things. And so I went from that area. I did that for about 9 years. I had a freelance consulting business that I ran out of that. And then at one point, I was asked to train people in that particular area. And through that, I learned skills about how to train people. And so that really became kind of my new path. I went into a technical training area, and then eventually that led to training people on other skills like sales skills and management skills and other things, and things that I learned along the way in order to do my business, and I was able to train other people. So my career was really like that until around 1998, and I was recruited by John Deere to do some consulting work in-house, and eventually they recruited me to become an employee. And I could stop there if you'd like, but just very quickly, my career at John Deere, and almost everyone is familiar with John Deere as a great global brand. They gave me immense opportunities to be an entrepreneur. And team and I, we launched a thing called John Deere University. And through that process, Devin, we were able to take tens of millions of dollars off of the bottom line of John Deere by providing training and other services to people outside of John Deere, and then taking those revenues and plowing them back into the entrepreneurial operations and into training employees. And so it was an amazing opportunity. I spent about 10 years with John Deere. Over the years, I worked with other companies. There was a spinoff from S.E. Johnson called Diversey. I worked with Medtronic, which is a medical device manufacturer. And I ended my career with a company called Buffalo Wild Wings. So if you're familiar with Buffalo Wild Wings, the restaurant chain, over 1,000 locations, more than 40,000 employees, and plus franchisees. And I was a vice president of organization and team effectiveness with them. So it was, can you imagine that really I started off as a janitor, I started off as a truck driver, all those things, and just primarily through the kindness of other people, I was able to move up and up and up through a corporate career, and eventually I was a vice president of an organization. So
it's really a remarkable career, but I think that leads us to the real power in your story. I think a few years ago you had something of an epiphany. Something that called you back to that epiphany you had after you nearly drowned. Tell us a little bit about what shook you up a few years back.
I think there were a few things, Devin. So one, so let me say it this way. I work for some great corporations, and there are some amazingly good people there. And there were some things that, being a corporate executive, you're asked to do that call into question, am I really working in alignment with my values? So, for example, I was asked at one point, if I would go with one of the companies I work for on a lobbying day. And that's a very common activity that we go and we lobby for things that benefit our corporation. Well, some of the things that I was being asked to lobby for actually ran counter to my particular set of values. And I began to ask myself, why do we stand for some things like this? And the other question that I kept asking myself was, to what end? And that's a very powerful question, I think. I was training people to become leaders, and I ran leadership development workshops around the world. And the question I kept asking myself is, if we create the world's greatest leaders, and these leaders are leading an amazing organization, what good is our organization doing in the world? And so that question was really beginning to bother me. And so I wrote a series of blog posts. And this is one of those things that when you're a corporate leader and you begin to write blog posts very publicly, you're sort of saying, I'm taking a stand in the world. This is who I am. And so not as a representative of my organization, but as myself as an individual, I took a stand in the world. And my blog posts, they really explored this question, Devin, about if, as the Supreme Court says, corporations are people, then we need to grow a conscience fast.
Yeah.
And otherwise, we are just giants walking around the world, consuming everything in it. And the question that really bothered me, and I could see this from inside of the corporate world, was we spend a lot of time creating value for customers, and we differentiate ourselves for customers, which helps us to create a lot of value for shareholders. And that's what we're here for, right? Please, customers, extract money for the value that we're providing and provide that money onto our shareholders. But the problem is that there are so many other stakeholders within any corporation. So there are our employees, there are the communities in which we work, and there is the planet upon which we depend. And why would we spend all of our time and effort on those two stakeholders and sacrifice those other stakeholders? And it turns out from my research, there really are reasons why corporations are built that way. I mean, there are legal structures, there are requirements to maximize shareholder value, and
Right.
also there are activist shareholders that if you are not maximizing profitability, then they can come in and sue you and force you to do things that will maximize profitability. So there really are, if you empathize from the corporate perspective, there really are reasons why corporations end up doing what they do. And that's when I began to read more about benefit corporations, about social innovation, about social entrepreneurs. And I was completely smitten. And, they say that writing clarifies thought. And so by writing this series of blog posts, I began to clarify my thoughts in those areas. And so I'll just stop there. I'm going on a little too long here. But that was really what was happening in my head there.
Yeah, it's an interesting life change. So you had this epiphany. You realized that there were things that you wanted to see different in the corporate world. You were maybe intrigued at least by B Corps. Tell us about your career transition. You became a podcaster ultimately. How did you make that transition?
Well, there were a few steps in there. One of the things I did when I first left the corporate world was I began working on a book. And the book really wasn't about this. This is what's really interesting. I had written this series of blog posts, and so they sort of sat there on the side. And I also started volunteering and mentoring some social entrepreneurs through the University of Minnesota through a program called Acara. And I love these people. I love these young social entrepreneurs that are just trying to make an impact in the world. So that was happening. And in the meantime, I said, well, I'm going to set up a company and I'm going to be doing consulting, and that consulting is in the areas of my expertise. So things like strategic planning, things like talent management, like succession planning, like leadership development. And I began working on a book. But the book was about the challenges that I was seeing in the corporate world. So not only from my own experience, but from the customers that I was calling on. When I asked them, what's keeping you up at night? It came down to this sort of theme. And that theme is that the rapid rate of change in the world. And it's almost as if our business models are being disrupted, and then there are disruptors that are disrupting the disruptors, and things are changing so fast. And the U.S. War College has a name for this. The U.S. War College calls this VUCA, V-U-C-A, which is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So I started writing this book about VUCA, and I was doing a brilliant job of describing the problem, but I wasn't doing a brilliant job of describing the solution. And I ended up with just a really nice description of the problem and some platitudes maybe around solutions, but I wasn't happy with it.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my wife about this one day, and she said, well, you silly, you're over here working with the social entrepreneurs and all these social innovative businesses. Isn't that really the answer to the question that you're asking over here? And it was like, duh, yes. And so all that sort of began to come together. And from my time of interviewing people for the book and that interview process, I began to say, aha, this would make a really solid, how do I scale my impact? And Devin, I think that's a great question we all can ask. How do I scale my impact? And a podcast just seemed like a natural way to do that.
Yeah, and you've had some real success with your podcast. It's really getting traction now.
We are.
That's great, and I congratulate you for that. Now, tell us a little bit about your podcast. Who are your guests? What's the format? What subjects are you trying to explore?
Right. So we're primarily focused on social entrepreneurs, and we talk to a lot of founders, but we also talk to thought leaders in impact investing and crowdfunding. And you might know one or two things about those things. So we had you on as a thought leader guest. So thank you for doing that.
It's an honor.
Yeah, and but we also talk to investors themselves, and we talk to other entrepreneurs who aren't necessarily social entrepreneurs. I spoke this morning to Laura Rerd. I can't think of her last name right now, but she started Meet Edgar. Now, she doesn't claim to be a social entrepreneur, but do you know the number one value in their company is kindness? And if you think about what is a social entrepreneur, what's the thing that we're trying to do in the world, isn't that about kindness? So we bring on a lot of different kinds of thought leaders in different areas. And then the basic questions are, what's your current thrust in the world? So what is your impact activity that you're doing today? What's your story? What's your journey? And how did you end up here? And then what advice would you have for others who are trying to do good in the world, social entrepreneurs and social innovation and social impact investors? And what's your advice for them? And then a call to action. At the end, we always leave every podcast with one call to action. And I think, Devin, if people are going to invest 30 minutes or so into listening, I don't want them to just hit next and go on. I want them to do something. So that's the basic format.
That's great. And I think it's really admirable that you focus on that call to action and get people to actually do something.
Thank you.
Yeah. You are becoming, of course, and are already to many a role model, but who do you look up to as a role model? Who inspires you? This could easily sound like a platitude, and I don't mean it to be that way. But the person I admire the most is my wife, Lynn. And let me tell you why. She was a corporate executive with AT&T. If you're ever watching CNN and a local ad comes on in the middle of it, or ESPN or some local cable company, at one time AT&T was sort of in that space where they were providing cable and they had cable media and advertising, and Lynn was one of the few people in the country who was working on that space. And she and her team and a few others, they figured out how to insert local ads into cable and to sell those ads. And so there was technology play and there was production. And so she was a general manager in that space and was a great leader. And her team, they still love her today. And she has not been in the workforce for almost 20 years. And so she created this incredible, impactful following among her team members. Now, she and I met in 1996, and she placed an ad in the newspaper. And her ad, this was before there was, all of our media ways of connecting online. And she placed an ad in the newspaper that said, "Partnership wanted." And she really meant that. And she and I have an amazing relationship today. We've been married since I believe it was November 1997. I better do more than believe. I better know the date. Right? So we've been married since November 1997, and it really has been an amazing partnership. But one of the things that I noticed as I was going around the world and I was teaching these leadership development workshops, when I would say, it's really important as a leader to be able to give feedback. Let me give you a good example. So now here's how my wife does it.
And people would laugh. Yeah, my wife gives me feedback all the time. Ha, ha, ha. But I really meant it, that as I think about a great leader and a person that I would love to emulate in my life, it's my wife, Lynn. I think she's the most amazing human being I've ever met. I admire her, and I think that she really helps me to be a better human being.
That's great. I appreciate that, because I have a wonderful wife, and I can appreciate what it is to admire someone the way you admire your wife. So I appreciate you sharing that. As we've talked a lot about what formed you and what inspired you, and of course I'm particularly intrigued, as I think everyone is, by your experience as a 15-year-old. And I wonder how, if you could just tell us how that influenced your life as you went through, because your career doesn't seem to be shaped by that experience until the last 3 to 5 years or so. Right. How did it influence your career in your 20s and 30s?
Right. I think that one thing I want to be clear on, I didn't come out of the water and live a life of perfection moving from that point forward, right? We're all on a path. We're all learning. But one of the phrases that came into my mind through a writing exercise many years ago was a thing called, part of my purpose is to facilitate the growth of others. And so as I was thinking about, how do I facilitate the growth of other people? That's part of my drive, my purpose, who I am. That's the impact that I'm trying to have in the world. And so that can show up in a lot of ways. It showed up as an entrepreneur. It showed up as a leadership development workshop facilitator, but it also showed up in ways when I was facilitating the growth of my team members. And over the years, I've been fortunate enough to have some large and robust teams, and I've had amazing human beings. And so one of the keys, and I hear this from people all the time when I'm interviewing them, and Devin, you probably hear something similar too, is make a difference where you are. If you are the janitor or you are the president, whoever you are, wherever you are, it's like whatever your hand finds to do it with all of your might. And, I think, Devin, the key theme that's sort of been driving through the back of my mind, it's become more clear so I can't ignore it anymore, is it's great to live a life of success, but beyond success is significance. And I think, to me, that's really where I'm driving toward. And as I get closer and closer to the end of this life, and I know as well as anyone that that date is coming sooner than any of us expect, but I'm driving as hard and as fast as I can towards the end of my life. And as I do, I want to drive beyond success, and I want to drive to a life of significance, not for my ego, not so that I'm well known or broadcast or whatever, but really so that I can make an impact while I'm here in this world.
Yeah, well, that is an inspiring response, and I certainly share your passion.
Yeah.
One of the things we do on our shows, we ask every guest for an impact hack, a tip that we can extract from your life to allow us to do more good. What's your impact hack for us?
I think clarity of purpose really sort of helps everything else you'll find that red thread that runs through everything. So let me just give you how it came to me, my personal purpose. I spent some time sort of writing my family history. So here's the story of Tony, right? And I set a timer. I did it for 3 minutes, and I said, in 3 minutes, write your life story. So you can try this at home. Set a timer, 3 minutes, write your life story. Now, at the end of that 3 minutes, take a look at what you included and what you excluded, but notice the values that show up in that. So in my case, I wrote about my mom and my dad and my brothers and myself and where I grew up and all that. And some of the values were things around hard work and spirituality and all these things that were important to me. And so those were the values. And so I listed out 10 values that came out of that. And then I wrote a sentence that said, what's important to me is, and I wrote that out, and I just free wrote for about 90 seconds. What's important to me is, based on these values, what's important to me is, and then I forced myself to shorten that to one paragraph, and then to one sentence, and then eventually I removed that any conjunctions in the sentence. So my sentence then says, what's important to me is, and when you get there, what you're going to see is you're going to see something that is purposeful. And you could almost say the purpose of my life is this. Because if you're clear on what your intent is, then all the outcomes become even easier and clearer, and you know where to drive, right? So that to me is a growth hack. That is something, if you are clear on your purpose, everything else takes care of itself.
Well, that is powerful principle.
Thank you.
Tony, tell us before you go how people can follow you. How do they find your podcast? What's your Twitter handle? Where are you on Facebook? Help us out.
Yeah, it's always helpful to spell my last name the way that I spell it. In my family, we spell Loyd with one L. So when you're looking for me, you can find me on Twitter at Tony Loyd. So that's TonyLoyd at Tony Loyd with one L. And then if you go to tonyloyd.com, you're going to find the podcast is there. On the right-hand side, you can subscribe on iTunes. You can subscribe on Stitcher Radio, on SoundCloud, or you can find, and the name of the podcast is Social Entrepreneur. So look for Social Entrepreneur, look for Tony Loyd. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. I'm on Google+. I'm pretty much, if there's a social media, I'm there. The one exception is on Instagram, I am Anthony Loyd. And there's a funny story. We don't have time for it today, but there's a funny story on why I am Anthony Loyd and not Tony Loyd on Instagram. I'll tell you that one another time.
Okay. Well, Tony, we really appreciate having you here with us today. And thank you very much for your time, your insights. Wish you every success in the great work you're doing.
Thank you, Devin.
All righty. Let's do some good.
All right.